Lumby.
Here.
Osterloo.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Bergen.
Here.
Voss.
Here.
Ursa.
Here.
Denslinger.
Here.
Allen.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Declaration of any conflicts of interest? Yes, sir. All right. Number 8? Yes. Okay. We have that noted. The agenda has been provided. Are there any additions or corrections?
Okay, I'd like somebody to table item number 7, the plat. We're going to move that to the next meeting.
So moved. Let's approve the agenda with correction. All in favor of the agenda as presented? Signal. Aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And now we can remove item number 7, if we would, please. So moved. Second. Moved and seconded that item number 7 be removed. Thank you. Okay, minutes of the meeting of January 13th, 2020 were provided in the packet of information. Any additions or corrections? I'll move to approve those. Moved and seconded that the minutes be approved as presented. Discussion. Hearing none, I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Blanket for the next meeting.
February 10th, 2 weeks from today.
Move to approve. Second. Moved and seconded that the blanket for the next meeting is set for February 10th. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We have removed item 7, the plat. Let us go on to item number 8. Rezoning, a hearing and action on an ordinance changing the district classification of real property currently owned by our Vera Queen of Peace from UD urban development and R4 high density residential to the Ridgeview on Foster Plan Development District. Do we have someone here who is going to talk to us about what that is all about?
So I will lead this off. Mark Fox, Mitchell Area Development and Chamber of Commerce. We've been having conversations with Mr. Clark, CEO of Vera Queen of Peace, over the last handful of months on this opportunity. So I'll introduce Mr. Clark in just a minute. He will be followed by another one of the individuals involved in this process, a gentleman by the name of Clint Powell, who will be here shortly. He is with Shelter Incorporated. And we'll have Jeff McCormick from SPN Engineering talk about the engineering aspect of this project. So with that, Mr. Clark, if you please.
Thank you. Again, Tom Clark. I'm the Regional President of Vera Queen of Peace. And thank you for having me here today. I'm just going to tee it up. Really, Clint and Jeff, and then we'll carry the water on this. But this is a project that came around because of the severe need we have in this community for attainable housing. Housing that is geared towards middle-income workers. There's really none in town, and it's a huge need for all the employers, not just for Vera Queen of Peace, but the manufacturers, the schools as well. This land, as you know, is located east of the hospital on Foster Street, and land that was acquired over time, I think originally with the intent that at some point if a new campus needed to be developed, it would be developed over there on that property. But as you know, we have staked our claim out along the interstate when we bought that land just west of Cabela's. And so anything we're going to do in the future for Vera Queen of Peace will happen out on that property. So we got to a point where now we have this asset of ground that we really have no intentions of ever using. And so it entered into the discussion about, well, is this an asset that we could leverage to help meet this housing need in the community. And so that's really what has brought this forward and what brought us here today. And it really is, a project like this really works because it's a partnership. This type of development is really, really difficult, if not impossible, for a traditional developer to come in and do. But with the value of the land donated, takes the land cost out of the equation, conversations with the city to TIF the infrastructure cost. Now you've taken significant cost out of the project that makes doing this type of a development feasible for the folks who need this housing. So we're really excited about it. It's really unique, I think. I'm anxious for you to hear more about it. And, oh, Clint's here. I'll turn it over to him. Thank you.
All right, if you'd please introduce yourself and talk to us.
Clinton Powell. I am the Executive Director for Shelter Community Housing Corporation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that works on attainable housing development in small communities around eastern South Dakota primarily. And then I'm also a registered professional engineer. I'm the head of marketing and business development for Burroughs Engineering. So from a larger concept, I guess, of what we're trying to do here, and this is going to be exactly that. This is going to be a concept, and it's a little bit hard to truly conceptualize the first time you hear it. So feel free to, I guess, ask questions as we go through it. One of the things that Shelter really focuses on is how do you bundle together public financing and revolving loan fund type dollars to make traditional single-family housing attainable for people that maybe make, let's say, less than 125% of median income. And Stephanie, do we have that?
What's that?
Do we have that drawing or that document that shows that?
He doesn't have that.
Oh, okay, that's fine. And so I think one of the things that's important to consider in South Dakota is the type of jobs related to that kind of income range. And so you're not really talking about low-income housing anytime when you talk about that in South Dakota. There's such a compression of wages in rural South Dakota that when we talk about folks that are eligible for funding, let's say under 115% of median income, you're really talking about a family, let's say, with 2 teachers. Or you're talking about a couple, let's say, where one of them may work at Trail King and the other one may be in retail. Those kinds of families are really the families that fall underneath that median income that we're discussing. So within this development, Shelter's concept is really to move away from a top-line number with a homeowner or a home builder. So instead of asking the question that everybody always wants to ask, man, what's the price of this house? It's an inappropriate question in my mind to start with the idea that, okay, this is $250,000 house. It may very well be a $250,000 house from a construction standpoint, but when we look at the homeowner that's eligible for that house, it's really about making houses that fit people's lifestyle, fit their income guidelines. And so if I've got, let's say, a $250,000 house. If I've got a $250,000 house, it's about making sure that I can make that same house, that if that fits somebody's needs, making that house affordable for somebody at $700 a month, and making that exact same house affordable at $900 a month. And so that's really a concept shift from the way we traditionally do real estate, of course. But it changes how you think about housing when we start doing something like this. And so we're able to adjust that monthly mortgage payment through a combination, let's say, of silent second mortgages, Some of those silent second mortgages may be fully forgivable to the homeowner if they're willing to stay in the neighborhood for 5 or 10 years. So it's instant equity gain for those homeowners. A portion of those funds may happen at 0% interest on their mortgage to allow them really to buy down their monthly payment while still repaying the full amount of the house. Some of it happens as just straight up principal buy down on the front end. So really a lot of different ways that you end up bringing that monthly house payment down to a point that's affordable. From a city government standpoint, one of the things to realize with it though is you're really talking though about a homeowner, regardless of what their monthly payment is, that's paying full valuation of taxes. They're paying full valuation of their insurance. So it's not like because we may be providing a house that's got $40,000 worth of principal subsidy on it, it's not like you've got a reduction of $40,000 in your property tax valuation. You've got full valuation. And so the other important thing I think to highlight as you're talking about a development like this is 100% of the single-family homes within the development will be built on spec. Not that the builder can have the homeowner pre-identified before they start construction, but the builder still has the obligation to carry all of the construction financing. We do that for two different reasons. Reason number one, you do that is because by having the builder carry the construction costs, that really gets away from some of the issue that we normally have with homeowners that tend to be not quite as financially literate always as some of our existing homeowners. And so going out and getting construction financing is a really scary process, especially compared to just going out and getting a mortgage. And so if we can remove that barrier for potential homeowners and switch that concept over to the builder, that really makes the ability to get into housing a much more attainable thing. The second reason we do that is because if the house is built on spec versus built with construction loan, then immediately that home qualifies as an existing home sale when we start looking at comparable homes. And so one of the hardest parts about buying a home in any smaller community, let's say Mitchell size and smaller, is really that gap between, okay, if I put an offer in on this house, how confident am I that the appraisal is actually going to come in where it should? And so if we're dealing with a local appraiser, I'm a whole lot more confident in that than if I'm working with an appraiser, let's say out of Sioux Falls sometimes. Then that gets to be a question of, okay, are they going to go out and actually look for the comps? Are they actually going to make a good faith effort to make sure that they get there? And so by creating a development of houses that from a market standpoint have a very good valuation on them, you've basically just created your own comparables for existing real estate throughout the community. And so then you've thereby increased the resale value of existing homes throughout Mitchell and the Mitchell region for that matter. So that's a little concept, I guess, about what Shelter is doing within this development. At this point, we're working with the builders on an initial RFP, pending your guys' approval and city approval, to start working with builders on how they would come in and build that. This development will be 100% built, I guess, local. If a local builder wants to build within the development, they absolutely have an opportunity. So this is not a development that's saying, okay, these 2 builders or these 3 builders are the only ones that have the ability to build here. It's really any builder that has interest has got the ability to put in a proposal under the current RFP. Questions on any of that?
So does most of the funding that you get for this come from the feds, or where does it?
So we're pulling funding in from a variety of different places. There's federal dollars involved with what we're doing. There's state dollars involved with what we're doing. There's private dollars. So a number of the banks that we're involved with belong to a commercial relending group that they have dollars that then they turn around and reinvest in the communities for housing-related development. So there's some of that. There's also dollars from private companies as well. And so we've got a number of corporations that have provided funds really as a part of a revolving loan fund to allow that price long-term to drop. They'll end up recouping their dollars in the end, but it's basically just a longer-term mechanism to help make some of those things affordable. So up on the screen, you're seeing Stephanie provide a copy, and you guys have a handout sitting in front of you now that kind of shows some of the average incomes that we see in South Dakota, and then how that relates to median income South Dakota wide. As you're looking at this project, you'll of course have median income guidelines that are specific for Davison County, but this will get you kind of in the ballpark of what we're talking about.
You mentioned a minute ago about other local builders. Are you talking for the whole concept, or can they come in and build on a piece of property? How is that going to work?
Well, so each of the builders gets the opportunity to say, hey, you know, over the build-out period, and so let's say we're talking about a 5-year build-out period. Each of the builders has the ability to say, actually, you know, looking at future workload, I could build 1 house in 2021, I could build 3 houses in 2022, I'm not going to build any in 2024, and I'm going to build 5 in 2025. And so it's really just a long-term forecasting of, hey, this is how many we think we can take down. Ultimately, the lots won't be transferred to the builder until they're ready to start that construction season. And at that point, based off the initial language in the builder's RFP, they'll have 18 months from the time that they take down the lot to have a certificate of occupancy and be ready to move somebody in.
Have you done this in other communities in South Dakota?
We have done this in other communities, yep. We absolutely have. And actually, this exact same concept, not on the scale, was already projected for the city of Mitchell. And so we had a commitment from about three homeowners to come in and work on this exact same concept within the city already. Other communities that we're working with, Armour, Parkston, Mitchell, of course, Huron, Yankton, basically every small town that you can think of around Mitchell, though, too. So,
Anybody else got any questions?
How many houses have actually been built into this program?
So we have construction contracts for 5 to start right away in the spring. Part of what we ran into is exactly what I'm talking to you about here in our first year of build out was the inability to get through the appraisal process. And so those 5 that'll get started right away in the spring will actually serve as a springboard to go to the communities around those 5. And so it took me a while to work out how all the financing was going to work with the bank on those first 5 to get through that appraisal process. So this spring you'll see construction of houses that Shelter's involved with, not necessarily the builder on, but involved with. You'll see in Plat, you'll see a home get constructed in Parkston, you'll see one in White Lake, you'll see potentially 2 here in Mitchell. I feel like I'm forgetting one. But.
Are you using any of the governor's housing programs in any of your communities?
No, we're not. And the primary consideration for us not using governor's homes is most of the time when we're doing housing development, in small communities, smaller than Mitchell, of course, their focus really needs to be on infill housing rather than new development. And that's primarily related to infrastructure costs, which we're all familiar with. But I mean, if we're going to go into a new development, of course, the absolute minimum that we'll end up with is about $10,000 per lot in infrastructure costs. And so when you're looking at a small community, it makes much more sense to leverage existing infrastructure and do infill lots that are already existing. And when you get into infill stuff, one of the issues that I guess I personally have and my board of directors has as well is the idea of going into, let's say, a historic neighborhood, a neighborhood that's pre-1950s, let's say, and putting a governor's house right in the middle of somebody's two Victorian houses. That's never an okay thing to me, I guess, from a longevity and how a neighborhood is going to feel long term. And so you'll notice with what we're promoting for design standards, as well as some of the initial concepts that Shelter has given to builders, we're very focused on single-family homes that are neighborhood appropriate and look as though that they would fit well in an established neighborhood rather than a governor's house plopped down on a lot.
So, Mr. Powell, just to make sure I understand what you were saying before, as I read the feedback from the public, their main concern is lots are smaller, it's going to be a denser development, it's going to devalue some of their surrounding homes, but you're saying that, in your experience, that would not happen here?
So my personal opinion is that if you are able to show a comparable sale, let's say of a $250,000 home on a 60-foot lot, when I am turning around and then adjusting that based on an appraiser's standpoint, if I can show a $250,000 house on a 60-foot lot, and then that just appreciates my home on my 80-foot or 100-foot lot. And so I realize the concern about density, let's say from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a home value standpoint, I don't agree with that statement, I guess.
Mr. Powell, go ahead. Mr. Powell, question on, you were talking about the affordability. Okay. So the contractor, you got your contractor set up, and he's going to put up a $250,000 house for you. How do you dictate to him then how much money he can make on that piece of property?
That's a good question. And so I always start this conversation by saying I'm as Republican as just as everybody else in South Dakota for the most part. And so that's a valid concern. And so when we go through our builder's RFP process, one of the things that we ask builders to do for us, and I realize that this is a stretch for some of our local builders, but I really say, okay, tell me what you've got into this house for a construction cost. Tell me what you've got into it for overhead. Tell me what you've got into it for contingency, and tell me what your profit margin is. And so really, if a builder is willing to open up their books and actually have an open discussion about, hey, this is what my projected profit margin is, then you can start to have those honest discussions about total price. And so that is a requirement of the builder's RFP that we have. And part of that is because of the difference, let's say, of building houses like this versus building our standard custom new build house that we normally see. On a custom new build, I mean, we should see profit margins in excess of 10% would be normal, and everybody needs to make profit margin, and I totally understand that. One of the things that we traditionally see in this type of market is oftentimes that a builder will take their slower periods and infill with this type of work. And so if I know I'm going to be slow this next summer or next winter, I may throw foundations in, I may throw my shell up, but then leave my interior finishes until my custom work is slowed down to the point where I can support coming in and doing interior work. And so that's oftentimes how we see that happening. But that is really the limiter on house price. So really this concept takes an awful lot of the price risk away from doing spec home building. So really, if you provide a proposal and a home plan that all the numbers add up and say that, hey, I'm going to build this house for $225,000, it's not really a discussion with the homeowner of what's the price. No, the price is set. We all know what the price is before the homeowner's even identified. Really, the risk for a home builder is if they choose to build on spec without having pre-identified their buyer, then there's carrying time risk, but really never any price risk, which is kind of a paradigm shift as well.
One other question. Have you all looked at design options where you can blend in larger lots with smaller lots, or is the quantity of lots a target that you are shooting for to make all this work?
Well, so I'll be very clear that I was not directly involved with design decisions. I mean, so design decisions, in a lot of ways, initial design that you're seeing here was developed by Planning and Development District 3, and infrastructure preliminary design was done by SPN. And so our involvement is really, okay, so how does the build out on a development like this work? I can tell you from some of those conversations that yes, other lot sizes have been considered. So when you're looking at total TIF increment associated with a development this size, and really our goal of how we're doing workforce housing, that if you went to a universally larger lot across the entire development, the TIF increment would no longer support the infrastructure costs. And so that I can tell you for certainty.
Other questions? I guess we're ready for Mr. McCormick.
Jeff McCormick with SPN. I'm just going to go through the reason that the layout is the way that we've got it laid out. For the first part of it, the street over on the far east side, there's already a city right-of-way that is dedicated there, so that's what kind of dictated that part of that location. Not only that, there's an existing water line that runs in that existing right-of-way. Second of all, there is an existing storm sewer line that runs along this direction, so that helped define some of that line and that location. There's an existing storm pond at this location that was completed because of the flooding that was happening at the Avera emergency room. So right now, we're looking at a phase 1 project, which includes this area and basically everything east of this. This area is remaining a parking lot for Avera for the time being until they relocate their campus. And then at that point, the need of this stormwater detention pond will be considered. Depending on what happens with the hospital's property, what happens with the 6th Street that was closed in order for the hospital to do their expansions, some of that will change the way the flow of the 100-year event and some of those areas are going. So that might change the need for this detention pond, or at least the size of it in the future. But right now that's excluded out of phase 1, and it did have some control over where our layout is at. The other portion of it is out of that detention pond, there's another storm sewer that comes along this direction, and that is what's caused this lot to be looked at it as a townhome situation, because we have a lot of that lot that's not buildable because of the existing infrastructure. And as Clint was saying, we try to balance what the infrastructure cost is versus the size of the lots, and to try to make the TIF financing of it work. That also played into this area, and just the fact of trying to relocate those utilities did not become cost effective of what we could gain for lots should we make that investment. One of the other items I'll comment on is it's cut off right here, but this does come over to Calhoun, and will connect to Calhoun and enter into that area. So there will be, for phase 1, there will be 2 locations that you can get in and out of this subdivision. For the most part, like I said, there's existing water that is currently in this location. Sanitary sewer will likely be handled by a lift station, and that'll be in this green space. That's another reason that is not looked at as developable. That'll serve this area and connect over to Calhoun Street, which that sewer, reviewed that sewer location, and we have capacity to connect the sewer at that location. That's the bulk of where the layout is. We did look at one layout that tried to extend the existing streets in those areas, but because of this infrastructure that cuts this way through it, we just couldn't get the lot density that we needed for all of the improvements. We had a lot of streets that only could have housing on one side, and it didn't come efficient enough. Questions regarding the infrastructure or the layout or anything of that nature? Yes?
In the corner over here where the blue is, yeah.
This here?
Yeah.
Yep.
I've been there when that thing is carrying a large capacity of water,
Mm-hmm.
and it is it's a threat. It's dangerous. I mean, the water gets extremely deep. Has that been addressed on this plan?
It's discussed that this area offers as a detention area and does fill up with water. The depth of it has not come into any conversations, I
It
guess.
gets deep, and it's moving rapid.
There's what is it, about a 30-inch pipe, I believe, that comes out of this area.
Out of the pond?
Yes. No, not out of the pond. That would have been, I think out of the pond is only either an 8 or a 10-inch line, but there's an existing 30-inch, I believe, storm sewer that runs along. Is that right, Joe? Is it 30? You know?
Comes
That-
out Foster.
Right, it comes up to Foster and serves all of,
Is there one currently coming off Brattle Drive as well?
I believe that might be further to the east. I think that it's outside of this development area, but you might be right. It might come down that Calhoun area.
Okay. I know someplace out here to the east is the old landfill from the teens.
Yep, when we've discussed that, and my understanding is that, and then this is just conversations because I wasn't familiar with it otherwise, is from right here, it's basically north and east of that portion of A Street. So that's what I've been told on that portion of it. I will say that when we dug in the storm sewer line for that, to outlet that detention pond, that we did not come across any landfill.
Yeah, the historic records from 100 years ago on that landfill site are a little sketchy.
A little sketchy, right. Yeah, no, my
I know it's
understanding is
there, too.
that's mainly north of where A Street
Yeah,
bends, yeah.
I've been around long enough to know that there's one out there someplace. All right, anything else for Mr. McCormick?
Jeff, off the top of your head, do you know the number of lots that you have on there? And I didn't find it in here.
The exact number of what it is?
Well, how many, yeah, or approximately, is it 50 or 40?
This north area, Larry, has 19.
Okay.
Then the final design of this one, we got true measurements to it, and with the plat, we got 7 across here. And then as right now, just from this way east, it looks like we're at 12. From here to, we'll stop at lot 12 for the phase 1 portion of it.
Going to build from the east going west, is that the idea?
Do you have the plat? Is that plat exhibit in there?
We have it in our.
Page 24.
Right. So maybe it'll just, or if there's that other phasing, go to that phasing PDF, that might show it a little bit better. Yeah, because that's what I was going to talk about a minute. So that, there kind of gives you the idea of where the phasing part's going to break for the time being now, and that's because Avera is going to retain ownership of this because of their parking lot, and then we can reevaluate that needs once something might change at that point. And if you do look at that example of that plat, that all the lots should be numbered within there.
Yeah, 24.
kind of hard to see up there, but.
When I looked at that plat, it looked basically like the lots that are on the north side of Bridle Drive there were gonna be about the same size as the ones that were
Right.
proposed.
The far east, or excuse me, the far west one of what we've got proposed looks like it matches almost exactly, and then there must be a little bit of difference because as we move to the east, we get a little bit off from where those actually property lines are. But this first lot right here lines up almost identical to what the other ones are, but as we move on, we get off there a little bit. I don't know if some people have a lot plus 5 feet of the next lot or something of that nature.
Jeff, is there an alley plan between Bridle Drive and your new? I think
No, there is
Some
not.
of these people, I think, have access to the back of their property.
There currently is no alley there.
Yeah, there's
So-
none on between, let's see, fourth and third, there's no alley there, and.
Yeah, there's no alley along this backside. So
I
it's,
don't know about between, Fifth and,
There's no alley between Fifth and Bridle Drive.
yeah. That's what I couldn't remember, I live over on Fourth, so.
Yeah.
I'm, between Third and Fourth, there's an alley, but between Fourth and Fifth, there's not.
there is easements planned for drainage and utilities, along there. With this north one would have a larger utility easement through there because that's where the sewer and water will come to serve those lots so that we don't have to tear up A Street and redo it.
You said there's a need for a lift station?
Yeah.
In the preliminary of where we're at right now is yes.
Yeah, I know.
Because
up
the
there on
property
Drive,
falls off to the east pretty far.
Where you go out here to Rose
Yeah.
Ladder Heights and that area, those folks that are into the sewer that comes down Bridle Drive, they have lift stations in.
And then my understanding is this property right here also has a personal lift station that pumps out to Bridle Drive.
Yeah.
So there's probably a good possibility that from about here west, we could serve with gravity line, but from the east, as far as our preliminary planning at right now, is we're planning on a lift station.
And those of you who have been on this planning commission for a while will remember that on the south side of First, in that development that Chuck did there, that sewer is deep. The city paid over depth on that. That's supposed to be designed big enough to pick up anything from Raleigh Young stuff.
Yeah, about from this location south.
Right,
Right.
right. I remember that discussion when that was opened up across the street there.
Quite some time ago.
Yeah, and it'd be west of what the golf course has done.
Yeah.
And that's been a day or two back. And there were a couple of us up on this commission at that time. And we were pretty gung-ho on making sure that happened, if I remember right, because we could see this area someday developing and what's gonna happen to sewer, because Bridle Drive is already coming out of the ground there. That's my 2 cents worth. Anything else that anybody else has? All right, if not, why, what we will do now is we will open up, this group has asked the questions of the people, and we will now open up for questions from the audience. We will limit those questions to about 3 minutes, because we don't need to be here all day. And I'm sure after a few of the questions get asked, they'll be the same question. So if anybody has a question, you can come on up to the podium, identify yourself, and we'll forward your question on to the proper person that can answer it here. So,
I have several comments to make. My name is Pam Baskey. I live on 8th Street. Of course, Avera's gift of land is very generous, and I have nothing against affordable housing, but I am against the way this proposed development does not blend well with the existing neighborhood on 8th Street and in Firesteel Heights. The proposed lot sizes are in stark contrast to the existing homes and lots. The proposed development has 60-foot wide lots with square footage of 7,800 square feet, which does not compare to the 95-plus lot widths and the 12,000-plus square footages present today. Because of this, we would ask that the map be redesigned to show all single-family residential lots to be more similar to the R1 requirements. And we are also asking Avera and the Development Corporation to move some of the lots shown in light yellow on the previous map up along 8th Street. And we are asking for all residential family housing to be along 8th Street and to get rid of the mixed-use section, because we do not feel that retail businesses are appropriate for our neighborhood. We find that they are disruptive and will cause extra traffic. We are also asking them to reconsider the street access, as we feel like the way this is drawn, all the traffic is going to be funneling down 3 to 4 blocks on 8th Street and also 4 blocks down on Bridal Drive, and that's going to cause a lot of traffic congestion. So there's a lot of things that we think can be done better to make this proposed development neighborhood appropriate, as Clint has stated, to use his words. It's not just the houses, it's the land. I want to go back up to one thing I said. As far as the R1 requirements, we're also asking for increased side yards, because they're currently drawn today in this proposal as a 3-foot side yard, and we would ask that they are increased to be an 8-foot side yard. Title 10, Chapter 9 of the City Ordinance says that a planned unit development must be designed in its space allocation, orientation, texture, materials, landscaping, and other features as to complement the design and values of the surrounding neighborhood. And we would ask that that be followed. This development will be around many, many years. Unlike the Development Corporation in Avera, we don't see a reason to hastily approve anything here as shown today. It takes time to lay solid plans. We have already invested in our neighborhood and community, and we're asking them to give the same respect and consideration to our input. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Elwine. I'm the city administrator for the city of Mitchell. The mayor and I have had an opportunity to have some different conversations, me sometimes one-on-one, and we did have a group of homeowners that came in and met with us last week. There were a couple questions asked that I thought it would be good information to share, and I didn't have it readily available at that time. First and foremost, we referenced that during our community visioning process, we just completed this. It was a 9-month process. Housing came up as one of the core or essential needs of our community moving forward. I just want to make everyone aware that the process included over 2,000 significant inputs. That was through either online community survey responses, people who participated in the workshops, or individual focus groups. Out of those that participated, over 80% of the respondents considered having a shared vision incredibly important to the future of our community. Throughout the strategic planning process, participants indicated that it is important for the community to move forward in a cohesive manner towards a future shared vision, where we should be regionally focused and look at pursuing emerging trends. And then approximately 65% of the community survey responses, and the online survey that had 1,000 participants in that survey, were between the ages of 20 to 50 years old. This is just a point that I'm making because the experience of our consultants in working in other communities had never seen a response rate that high for that age group. Typically, it's hard to get them engaged in the process. I did provide you a handout that shows some of the breakdowns of that. Also, the people who responded to the process included anyone who'd lived here from 40 years plus, to we had people who had lived here less than 5 years, and it was a pretty even distribution. One of the items that was discussed as part of the full engagement process, where over 2,000 people participated, was they had to rate a number of different factors that they felt could affect the future viability of our community as we grow and move into the future. That one of those options was housing options and types of housing available. I did go back into the community survey data responses to want to see kind of what the responses were from people who participated in that. The consensus of the over 2,000 participants was that the Mitchell community viewed our current status as negative and that we are not prepared for the changes needed in this area. Then I wanted to look at how does that look when you break it up into different age demographics. And when you did that, and I broke it down to those who were below 40 years old, you have another handout here that shows the different age groups. And the 20 and under thought the most negatively about that criteria. The next one would be 31 to 40-year-olds and the 20 to 30-year-olds. So when you take the larger consensus group and you break it down to the smaller group sizes, you can see that younger generations in our community, the ones that would be eligible for this type of housing, are the ones that view it most negatively in our community. What other ones do I want to point out? The only other thing is all the participants who went through the engagement process were also asked how important certain factors will be to Mitchell in the year 2030. And that chart showed us that 75.23% of the respondents said that housing options and types of housing available are incredibly important for our community. One other question that came up, and we relayed this to some of the community members, and I think Joe might even have, I'm going to give you some probably way too much personal information, but I was asked, well, how would you like this if this was your neighborhood? And I just wanted to share that when I lived in Brookings, I bought my first house I had bought individually was a twin home. I bought the house for $140,000. 4 years later, it sold for $175,000. So I got $35,000 equity in less than 3.5 years. During that time frame, a development just like this, 60-foot lots, went in one street over. I'll pass the teachers and the nurses and the people buying their first house that lived there for 4 or 5 years. Then they sold it and they moved somewhere else when they had their second or third kid. I'm telling you, living in the development was not a problem for me. And I know sometimes it's more about the fear of what we don't know, but they were attached double-car garages. These are the kind of samples that we were looking at in conversations with Avera about something that would be aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood. Because I had an example, I thought I would share it with all of you. And I can certainly answer any questions about the community engagement process too, if you have any of those.
Thank you. I have one question that, define for me what you're thinking about for those pocket neighborhoods. What's that all about?
I was kind of hoping that Eric Ambrosian from District 3 would be sitting here in the back.
Come behind you.
Oh, there he is. Good. Answer away.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Ambrosen with Planning Development District 3 out of Yankton. And so, yeah, maybe I can try to provide a little method to the madness here with what was going on behind the design of the neighborhood and the reason for some of the specific housing types. We were brought in to kind of provide some planning, master planning for this development as a result of the opportunity to provide needed housing in Mitchell. And there were a couple of parameters that we had to work with, in terms of the Avera donating the land. One of them was that it did need to be attainable housing, and then the other parameter was focusing mainly on home ownership. And so we did take cues from Stephanie, with the neighborhood that she did live in Brookings, and actually measuring the lot widths that in the neighborhood that she lived in, we're at this point we're actually about 3 or 4 feet wider, if not more than that. And yes, those housing types, those designs are probably similar to what we're looking at with Shelter Inc. and the builders. Anyway, to your question about the pocket neighborhoods, it's definitely a wild concept, and the exact, dimensions and the exact vision of what that's going to be is a little bit fuzzy at this point because that is such a new concept here in the Midwest. So there is a screen or a slide up on the screen showing some examples of what pocket neighborhoods look like. They are fairly popular in the Pacific Northwest, in the Seattle area, Portland area. And the idea is that the market for those might be that transition, maybe the boomer generation that may have different preferences, market preferences for that type of housing that they've just emptied the nest and they're not, for sure, not ready for a retirement place or an assisted living center. So something that has some density to it, but yet each housing unit in that pocket neighborhood is its own unit, and you could own that particular house. So, like for example, the one second from the left on the bottom there, each of those homes is a traditionally built home, traditional design, and not the best example in the middle, but that would be maybe like a common green space. So you may not necessarily have your own big yard, but all of you have a yard to play with, or go meet with, or go meet together. Or even, I guess, the bottom left picture there on the screen might be a better example of that common green area. And then there could be at the far end of that one picture and the far end of the other left picture is somewhat of maybe like a common house or a club building that you could come in and whether it's cheer on the Chiefs in the Super Bowl or cook a meal together, who knows? So the idea was that could be the market. Maybe at that I hate to say senior, but I mean, because it could be my age, barely 50, that may want to look at an alternative to other types of housing. On the other side of that coin, it could be that the workforce that comes to Mitchell, if they were to settle in Mitchell, do they maybe have different preferences for the types of houses there or the types of neighborhoods they live in, based on whether it's culture, experience, economy, those kind of things. So that's the idea, or the kind of the concept behind the pocket neighborhood idea. I guess could I address one little thing about the mixed use corner there? Okay, so the concept is actually based on the visioning process that the city went through. Actually, this whole thing does kind of base off of this, the visioning process. In the report, the vision talked about looking forward to the future with and kind of looking at a neighborhood concept type of design for future development, and so that was, keeping that in mind, that's kind of what we looked at as the concept or the reason for that, the mixed use corner there. And mixed use might be a little bit of a stretch of a term. The idea there was that maybe they're more of a vertical, that'd be vertical mixed use with some type of service or owned structure on the main level, and housing or a housing unit on top of that, second level. Again, fairly new concept in our area. I don't know that it would necessarily be the retail things that you're thinking about there. That would not be the intention that we were thinking of there. Other than if I was a maybe a independent service provider or an independent consultant, maybe I don't want to have build a big office and live far away. The idea would be that you could provide that service or have a place to work separate from your dwelling area, and then still have that interaction with the street outside. But again, I would not necessarily look at, or the intention was definitely not a traffic generating type of retail use. And that also is not, again, all of the details are not worked out on that particular corner. But is that maybe a way we can provide? And I think it talked about innovation and entrepreneurship in the vision plan. And is that maybe some way that we could provide space for, innovation and entrepreneurship to occur? And so, again, that could be, that's definitely something we could work out, argue with, whatever. But how's that for just a description of pocket neighborhoods?
Has any pocket neighborhoods been tried in South Dakota?
There is one in Spearfish, just north of downtown. And I would say that is definitely not the best example. From a design standpoint, yes, it's a good example. I believe price-wise, though, they're up there with, well, of course, Spearfish is expensive to live in anyway. But that's not exactly what we're looking at, but Spearfish is one. Was a developer trying to look at one in Sioux Falls?
To get good examples of it, you really have to move a lot of times out of South Dakota. And so I'm in the middle of design of one actually in the middle of Omaha right now. I mean, that's traditionally where we see a lot more of it. One of the things that we've talked about from a design standpoint within our group is the ability to potentially, one of the concerns that we've heard on these pocket neighborhoods is the detached garage. And so I think there's an... Oh, that'd help, wouldn't it? Sorry. I could hear myself talking, so that's good.
We can hear you.
One of the concerns that I think we've heard some from folks that have seen the concept is the idea of 100% detached garages, and that's a valid concern, I think, especially with South Dakota Widner. And so one of the things that we're looking at here as we talk about design stuff is there's some tweaks that you can make within that pocket neighborhood to really do attached rear-facing garages. And so we see that as a concept that's got potential to work on both of those pocket neighborhoods. And I think that increases the likelihood that we see those turn into, for sure, I guess, the ability to see some senior housing in some of those pocket neighborhoods as well, if it's at a rear attached.
Well, I think in earlier discussions, we kind of figured out why the streets are where they're at. I think Jeff covered that pretty well for us. But one of the things, I guess, that I had a question about was, what about the lot size to fit the TIF? Because the infrastructure that's got to go in there on top of what's already there, and there's some that's already there. But what's there isn't going to help a lot for what's needed, because you're talking basically storm sewer that's there. And that's probably going to have to be enlarged as well once you get a bunch of roofs out there. The ground won't absorb what it does today. But where does that break at the TIF? Has anybody looked at that real closely?
To add to that, if you would take out this mixed use area and put in more lots, would that get you closer to being able to make your TIF work? And still maybe make these lots on 8th Street R1 a larger lot?
If I can answer just one question on the lot size, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question about where the lot size driving the TIF.
Yeah, that's a question.
I don't think the lot size is driving the TIF. I think the thing to keep in mind is we know what the estimated infrastructure cost is, so we know how much increment would have to be generated to fund that. Due to the redesign, they've went through various phases of what this could look like, and I think, as you heard Jeff say, I think they have presented the most efficient use of the land to keep the cost of the infrastructure as low as possible. Now, we haven't finalized, obviously, anything with looking at what the increment development is. Anytime I've been a part of the conversation, our process has been to take the most conservative approach as possible, knowing that you will have to go through a public process with some of, these discussions. So is anything a make or break at this point? I can't answer that until we see what the final design of the development is.
Okay. And I think one of the other things that...
We've built in some buffer.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay.
Well, I know one thing we had to consider too was, and we had some discussions about this last Thursday was, is there some room for some changes or manipulation of the lot sizes? For the most part, yes, there are some opportunity, and I guess the main thing we have to consider, is the wishes of Vera in keeping this neighborhood attainable and provide homeownership opportunities and possibly, entrepreneurship opportunities. Is it on the table? Probably, yes. But that would be, it's all, we have to make sure that we meet the wishes of Avera and also making sure that this thing, floats the TIF.
And to
Well,
complement
and
that, a lot of what Avera's requests were for the land donation matches what the city would require if a TIF was going to be used for residential development. It has to also be that attainable type housing that you're not finding elsewhere.
Right.
Stephanie, what I've been hearing out there, obviously, I'm in Ward 3 where this is at. What I've been hearing is on 8th Street, you got 10 lots there. See if it's in the buffer zone to go down to 6 lots and make those 6 lots 100. If sustainable for a TIF.
I think the problem that you're going to get into is that it has to meet that attainable housing criteria to meet the donation requirement from Avera or the gift, as well as the requirements with the state for still being considered economic development.
Well, this is what I hear from the people, that neighbors that live in that neighborhood, and maybe it's maybe you got to go down to 95 feet to make it work. I don't know, but I think in your buffer, I think we all got to get along with this show.
Well, one of the things that concerns me too is on the west side of that lot, there's a pretty good-sized transformer yard sitting in there, Craig, isn't there? And now we're going to put a bunch of new housing in here. I'm sure you guys are going to have, at Northwestern is going to have to do something to that transformer yard. And I don't know if that's been considered, but that's got to be, we got to think about that too.
I think, just take my hat off here from the planning commission, put my Northwestern hat on. That substation was, a lot of improvements have been made to that.
Okay.
Substation it's got a lot of room. So really, we'd be looking at just adding distribution lines. So we would probably, if we did anything there, we could work within the space that's there.
Okay. One of the reasons I think that you sit on this commission back in the day when you were appointed is because we would like to have that kind of input from you as we're considering these kinds of things. And I think that's one of the reasons you're here, and I'm glad.
We're good with gas infrastructure too. We tend to overbuild.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. The young lady mentioned something about the streets here a little bit ago, and given the fact that Jeff talked to us with what's already there, I don't know if there's any options that are, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeff, but I don't think there's any options that you can put the streets anyplace else than other where you have them, is there? I think you've looked at that pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, we did look at the possibility of it being able to extend Roland and Fire Steel. It just, with the other infrastructure that's there and the detention pond that needs to remain in place because of Avera, we weren't able to get the lots even close to what we needed to for the amount of street improvements that we were doing at that point. It just become much less efficient of a development. And with the fact that the pond is there, there's a substation there already, really we're limited on what options we can have for even another street going to the west to Foster Street.
Yeah, it's just not going to be there.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Kyle Croce with Public Works. If I could just ask a question about the zoning on the corner of Foster and 8th, maybe Neil could go over that. What is the zoning on each corner and in the surrounding area on the corner of 8th and Foster?
You want to pull up the map, it's on page.
And you're thinking existing zoning that's there already?
Right.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
You go to page 20 of your packet, you can kind of see what I did here is I overlaid this. Now these legal cards as the areas. As you can see, I've tried to identify, they're not exactly,
the area where I said here is the zoning is A, that's the area representing on the other map, the orange area, the mixed use, if you will. And then area B, there's 2 area Bs, actually 3 if you count. That's the yellow areas that we just saw. Those are primarily the single family. Area D is that row of townhouses. Area C is the large piece minus which is in the different phases. So if you remember seeing that phase 1 and phase 2. Okay, the existing ordinance right now is urban development. That's the UD that you see. That is the area that you see as area A and area B. So that triangle piece, that's what the current zoning is now. And the area where you see C and D, that is R4, if you can't read that very well. That's our high-density residential district. And then the bottom strip, you would see where the parking lot is, as well as area B. That is also addition to R4. So just as a procedurally, what's before the Planning Commission and ultimately perhaps the Council is what the proposal is to rezone the urban development parcel, the R4 portion, and the second R4 portion to what is called a planned development district. And basically what a planned development district is you're making a separate zoning district for this particular development. And so the setbacks and the permitted uses and the conditional uses and the other standards and so forth are set forth in that planned development district that you'll probably have seen copies of. And the areas are identified on there. So as you probably saw, what is the uses would be in the standards in area A, B, D, and C4. So again, just so that you know that triangle piece on the north is urban development, and the other 2 pieces to the south are R4, which is a high-density residential. So,
Neil, what type of construction can be built in urban development?
Urban development is primarily single family. It's actually designed for the area that is kind of right outside the city limits. There's possibly some types of ag uses perhaps there, and things of that nature. Again, for larger lots, you know, like I said, a good area that's like it is around the Maui Drive, the island area is urban development. Trying to think of some of the other areas outside the city.
South Trail Gang.
Some of those areas there.
Neil,
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, but urban development, another example would be storage units, self-storage units could be built there?
Could be,
Or-
with the conditional use, yes.
Or a neighboring manufacturing plant?
I'm not so sure about manufacturing. It probably depends
They
on the
could
nature
build,
of it.
they could build cold storage units there, though, under the current zoning?
I'd have to look up, but we could look. Can you pull up the zoning code? Let's just do it that way. That way I'm not off memory.
You know, having been on this commission for a year or two, urban development has often been a thorn in our side because its original purpose was to allow things to happen as the city expanded, other districts expanded, and a lot of things that happened in the urban development district was there were individual homes being built out there, and then when industrial, which was next door to it, wanted to expand, so now we got a home setting in an industrial area or so on.
Well, Wade has pulled up there is the permitted uses, and the permitted uses are uses that are allowed without a hearing per se. And those would be the permitted uses that you would see in the urban development district. Scroll down a little bit. And then the conditional uses would mean that they would have to go through the hearing process. So those things, there you go. Those would be ones that would have to go through a conditional use process. So let me see if there's storage. Keeps scrolling down there, I believe. Yeah, there it is. Outside storage, commercial storage would be a conditional use. So.
And a forest.
Yeah. Conditional, and if the uses are not listed there, they're not allowed. So it would be a prohibited use. That is just the urban part, the urban district part. The rest of the R4 is the other part.
Neil, do you want to pull up the R4?
Yeah, you could do the R4.
Currently allowed there?
Yeah, go to R, that would be the residential one.
And that would not require a change in zoning, correct?
Well, in the R4 part, right. Go to,
But you gotta remember that when you get into a planned development district, that planning sets what's going to happen inside that particular district.
go to chapter,
And it could be all R4 that they decide to do. And also, when you do a planned development district, the developer can put some caveats onto that which are not found in any other district.
go to chapter 5 there. Yep, go to chapter 5, scroll down.
One more down. There you go.
It's easy to do when everybody's watching you. There you go. There would be the permitted uses that would be allowed in R4. You can scroll down maybe a little bit, people can see them. And then the conditional uses, primarily anything over 24 units would require a conditional use, which would mean you'd have to go through a hearing process, so.
So if you'd scroll up a little bit, please. Right there. So under current zoning, you could put a multi-family dwelling of 24 units in there right now with no questions asked. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Actually, that's not correct because it's just asking. They've laid out the parameters already. So we're talking about something.
No.
Only if it's approved.
Right.
If it
The
doesn't
way
get
it is
approved,
now.
It stays as is.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, if the PDU here, if we don't take a look at that and do a PDU, the zoning will stay as it is.
And so that's for the R4 that's there right now. What's urban development? Can you go back to what's allowed right now as it is zoned, urban development under that section?
And that's your area B.
The north side. North.
That would be the portion next to 8.
So again, my question, as it's currently zoned, if nothing has changed, anything on that list could go there right now, no questions asked. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. Assuming it fits and all those other things. But that's, yeah, the use itself.
I guess it all depends on the body.
That's right.
If they don't, then it sounds like it's just gonna stay that way. Unless they wanna put a 24 complex on, it's up to them, you know. But, I don't know, there's, you know, as far as the people are concerned about, changing zones, you know, I'm kind of confused right now, are we gonna just vote yes or no? Or is the community willing to change the design? I mean, we haven't heard from them, I mean, it was addressed that, hey, is there a possibility? So, right now, I don't know if I want to vote yes or no.
I got one more question. I'm not certain who can answer it. When I got the packet, I had no idea what a pocket neighborhood was, so I went to the old reliable internet and Googled it and got the internet's interpretation of what a pocket neighborhood was. Okay, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it suggested that in these pocket neighborhoods where there's a shared green space, that there is an HOA involved. And if there's an HOA involved, that sometimes affects the ability of the buyer to get a bank to go along with it. I was concerned if that's been looked at, is there going to be an HOA? Who's in charge of the HOA if there is? And how is it going to be funded and maintained? Just a question.
So one of the things you'll note right now is the pocket neighborhoods are not individually platted. And part of the reason that's a true statement is because I think some of those things need to be better fledged out through your guys' process, through the city process. And so currently, where shelter is with our portion of the project is we've issued a builder's RFP basically for the single-family traditional residential housing that we're used to. Under this phase one, the areas that we haven't done anything with yet at this point would be the areas that are currently listed as townhomes and that kind of mixed-use / pocket neighborhood area. Ultimately, the way I think that will end up working is that if planning and zoning were to approve stuff here and the city were to approve stuff and we get through the TIF process, shelter would issue proposed design request for proposals of, okay, so this is the area. How do we make that fit within the kind of the requirements of the neighborhood so that it still feels cohesive with what we have going, and really work with the designer and the builder at the same time to kind of fledge out that process and make sure that we've got a viable solution there. There are a lot that do those as HOAs, you're exactly right. HOAs are not necessarily a problem from the conventional mortgage side of stuff. The biggest problem that we see with that type of process is just the lack of understanding from our mortgage underwriters in South Dakota. So it's very rare that we do any condo lending, let's say, in South Dakota. And so that's as much of an education process for us to work with the bankers as it is for the bankers to work with the homeowners. And so we're prepared to go through that process, I think, if that ends up as an HOA.
Ultimately, one would assume that there probably would be some sort of a homeowners association involved. I mean, it's certainly not going to go to the Park and Rec Department to go and maintain the yard, correct?
So I don't see an HOA for the entire development, though. I mean, I think that's where I was trying to.
I was talking primarily or strictly with the.
Just those areas. Yep. Yeah. If that's the concept that moves forward, yep, that will likely be an HOA just for that area.
Okay, I have one other question, and we've got a couple of people that want to make some comments here. Stephanie, how far down the road are we on looking at the TIF for this?
Sorry. We're sharing a microphone. Again, Stephanie Elwine, City Administrator, City of Mitchell. We have, I believe, maybe got a preliminary application. Really not wanting to get into that until the plan development is finalized because that's going to impact what we estimate for the increment.
Okay, that's where I was going with this.
And you, as you know, being on this board for a number of years, once you set that clock, the zoning board hears that TIF and sets the boundaries, your clock starts ticking on the development. So we wanted to make sure we give time for this to work its way through so we know what we're actually estimating before we get into the application.
Right. And at this point in time, the PDU is still flexible. The way I understand what we're supposed to be doing here today, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we're supposed to give an okay to the concept, but we haven't seen the final 2x4 work of the PDU. Is that, or is the PDU that has been presented to us with all the regulations, is that where we're supposed to be right now?
So it is basically a yes or no today.
I would say yes, you are correct.
Okay.
They are proposing this as a planned development, and you see what they're planning. So your action would be on what you're seeing here today.
Okay.
I do have one question before we move on. Are there any protections in any of the language to keep any of these properties from becoming rentals?
Yes, there are. So the initial language says 5 years. I think that has still got the ability to be adjusted, I guess, if that's the will of everyone involved. But there is currently will be a deed restriction that's put on that property that prevents anybody from switching it from a single family owner occupancy to a rental within that kind of 5-year affordability period that happens after sale of that property.
5 years from that
From the
property
sale. Yep.
From the sale.
So this end is not developed, this side is 5 years old, it could be a rental.
potentially. But that, like I said, that timeline is something that we can still discuss, and I don't think is set in stone by any means.
That would, if we approve this and the council approves it, then in order for this PDU to change anything in the writing, this is what I understand of a PDU coming down the line, they'll have to come back and do an ordinance change. Is that correct, Jeff? Where's our attorney?
Justin Johnson, city attorney.
There we go. I've got too many J's around here.
Anything that's contained in the ordinance, they would have to come back and change by ordinance.
Yeah.
But that's not an ordinance. I mean,
Right,
that's not an
the
ordinance.
covenants themselves would not be an ordinance, that
Yeah.
would be part of the development process.
All right, any other questions from the folks sitting around this table before we listen to some more comments?
Hi, I'm Kathy Wire, a resident. I have two questions that I'd like to ask them both, and then I'll sit down. Number one, on the previous zoning map that you had of the current zoning, is there a possibility of an access road to the development off of Foster, just abutting north of the current parking lot for Avera? Number two, the residents around this area received a packet in the mail just last Tuesday in which we were to mark approve or disapprove and then note our comments. And would you please tell us what were the results of those packets that you received back in terms of disapprove or approve, and then also a synopsis of the comments?
Well, I just counted mine, and there were 55 disapproves. I didn't see an approvement.
There was one approval
There
with
was
a
one
couple of
approval.
comments.
There was one.
Yeah.
Oh, with the,
With a
yeah.
couple of comments, so that's kind of a half approval.
That's right, I'm
Yeah.
staying corrected.
It looked to me, going through them and reading all the comments, primary concern was the R1 area of adjoining 8th Street. That seemed to be primary, at least in my small mind. Next seemed to be the folks along Bridle Drive concerned about an alley access. Other than that, lot size was probably the next one in there too. Primarily, the lot size looked to me like most of them were directing it towards the lots on 8th Street.
Mr. Chair, I think there were 6 that were outside the neighborhood and 2 outside the city limits as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Certainly.
The fundamental mission of the Mitchell Area Development Corporation is driven by job creation and wealth creation in the entire community. We met with the neighbors today. We understand, we appreciate their concerns, but we need to look at what's in the best interest of the entire community. We're at a really important point, and Ms. Elwine pointed out the results of the 2040 results, which again had over 2,000 respondents indicating they want the community to move forward. We can do nothing and the community can continue as it has been, or we can move forward. There's been a lot of work, effort, and energy put in by all of those people that were part of the 2040 process, by all of our boards, by the city council, by city leaders. We have a tremendous amount of momentum building. Everyone sees the tremendous potential this community has. Every week, I get phone calls encouraging new retail development. Go get Target. Go get Hobby Lobby. Go get Buffalo Wild Wings. Do this with Shopko. Do that with Kmart. Every one of those based their decisions on population trends. Our population has been stagnant or declining for several years. If we don't do anything to change those population trends, none of those retail opportunities are coming. And all of those retail opportunities and desires are all things that would be frequented by everybody in this room. Let me give you a couple of economic impact scenarios that I'd like to lay out. In the proposal that is on the table right now, there are 94 homes, single-family homes. If you use an average income of $60,000 per home, that's an additional $5.6 million in wages. Now, some economists want to tell you that the dollar rolls over 7 times in the economic region. I think that's a little aggressive, but let's use a rollover factor of 2.5. $5.64 million in wages using a rollover of 2.5 equates to $14 million annually in wages. Multiply that by 10 years. That's $141 million. That means more tax revenue, more services, more quality of life amenities that, again, every resident of this community will enjoy. I can also tell you from visiting with all of our industry, business, manufacturer, IT companies, currently they're collectively, aggregately, they're leaving about $30 million of business on the table annually because they can't find employees. It's no secret, no question. The number one issue facing our community is finding employees. Within the workforce issue, the number one reason is single, attainable, affordable family homes. $30 million that is being left on the table would create 180 new jobs. If you use an average wage of $18 an hour and multiply that by 2,080 hours a year, that's an additional $6.8 million that would come into this community. Again, using the rollover factor of 2.5, that's just under $17 million of annual impact. Multiply that again by 10 years, we're talking $170 million of new revenue generating new taxes, more services, more quality of life amenities, and so on. It has been mentioned that this was done hastily. No, it wasn't. We've had a solid team in place looking at this for a long time. We've been using an international real estate land development company that has fully vetted this process and this project. They have endorsed it 100%. They are telling us it's exactly what we need. We could make these lots 95 to 120 feet, but the fact of the matter is the houses still need to sell for $275,000 or less to utilize the programs. If not, then they're outside the parameter of the mission and the vision of a Vera Queen of Peace, the mission and the vision of Forward 2040. Mr. Chair, I would ask that you call the question.
All right, thank you. Comment?
Mr. Chairman, Shannon Sandoval, Fire Marshal, City of Mitchell. I know we've heard a lot of information today, and unfortunately, I'm going to give you a little bit more. A couple things. I know that this is a concept, and there's a lot on the table here, but I would like to point out 3 sections of this said plan for firefighter access. One being the mixed use. I guess we'll call that the northeast corner of the mixed use there. Northwest. Yes. Thank you. And the pocket homes as well, that corner piece as well. You think about this now, in the summertime when there's nice trees and screen out, how are our firefighters going to access that area? Can we pull it from the street? Nothing in this plan is not in the code as it sits now, but the fire code is the minimum. I would just ask you to consider some of that access issues that we may have in the event of a fire or a medical emergency. It is feasible that we could set up our apparatus on the road and pull hose lines to most of these areas. However, fire doesn't subside roughly every 90 seconds, or we're going to take the extra time to have to pump through snow and or any vegetation out there to access homes. So, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Go ahead.
I missed one note that is really important. In light of our conversation with the neighbors this morning, which we're appreciative of having the opportunity to hear their concerns, I would offer an amendment to what you have before you to take the yellow lots, the single-family lots, just south of 8th Avenue, and change those from a 60 to an 80-foot width. I would further suggest in my amendment that the mixed use live-work units be turned into one single lot. We can call it Lot A, and this body can address it at a later time when that is further flushed out.
Well, I was looking at that too here earlier, and as the plating is coming in, I see those two areas where the pocket homes, pocket neighborhoods and so on, there is no plat designed for that in the preliminary layout here. So I'm guessing that those would come before us at a future time, which would include street, et cetera. Is that, am I wrong there?
Nope, that's correct. And so that'll likely be private streets, so that shouldn't be a city issue. But once I think those concepts are better developed out, then I would anticipate that you guys will see that in front of planning and zoning again. And so we see that as an opportunity then also at that time to address the fire department concerns we have with access and stuff like that. So no, there's additional time, I think, in the process to work through that.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't really too concerned about that, fire code things, because I saw those as huge areas, not necessarily a lot. I think the only lot that's in there is the lot that Northwestern probably owns where their substation is.
So by making amendments, you're saying by the bigger lot, you still will be in the pit.
Along, yes, those lots right there, yes.
Just on 8th.
Just on 8.
I wish we would have had a layout that would have been type A, type B, and two different options that we could have saw versus what you all saw. I mean, that would have cut it down a lot shorter. Can we further amend it to get rid of the 3-foot
Well,
side yards?
Let's wait a little bit, and let's think about this a little bit. Let's go back to the folks from Avera. If we would table this for further development based on discussion here, maybe that's the route we ought to look at, because I think the city here is going to have to be involved in some of these discussions too, because of the cost of infrastructure and laying it out. And Jeff McCormick and the folks there, they're making a good guess at what it's going to cost at this layout, which is going to develop or affect what a TIF to pay for it is going to do. And as the city administrator pointed out, once that TIF is set up, the clock starts ticking. And in order for the folks to work on the TIF, we need to know what the infrastructure is going to have to look like. And if we change these lot sizes, that's going to affect that. So I'm not so sure that we're ready to vote on this thing at this point in time. That's my thinking, because I think a lot of folks understand that we need this. And if some of, at least the way I read some of the comments that we received, if there are some additions or corrections to what was presented to us in this initial layout, that they might be a lot more happy with what's going on. So I'm not so sure that we're ready to make a motion and act on this thing. That's just my opinion. But we've heard a lot of information here today that, you know, we've looked at this on a piece of paper. Us guys sitting here at this table. And as I've said before, you know, we're kind of looking into a crystal ball here, and it gets awful cloudy. And the more we use some Windex to polish it, maybe the better off we are. And I see a young lady that's looking like she might have something to say to us.
I'm in agreement with you. I feel like I don't understand enough about the amendments, and we had discussion this morning on more than just what was amended. We can hear it on the recording.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I am in agreement with you, Mr. Larson, because we had discussions this morning that entailed a little bit more than what was just put into the amendment, and we need time to consider the amendment and make sure we're on the same page with it. And so that's one thing that I had asked this morning, is that this be redrawn, and so we can look at it. And, you know, maybe you don't have to go to the degree of getting all the engineering drawings, but in concept, show us what you're talking about with the amendment so that we can get on board.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
At the meeting we had this morning with the neighbors, was it not stated several times that we don't want to kill this project?
Stated by who?
The neighbors.
Yes, and I don't believe that any one of us here today is trying to kill this by tabling the decision-making.
I didn't say that as far as the tabling. I just asked the question if that was the sentiment of the group.
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking that, and maybe I'm wrong here, guys, but I'm thinking we probably need to table this to let the folks that are involved in it to do some more tweaking. Shall we use that word? Given the fact that if we approve it or disapprove it, then everything is back to the drawing board. And maybe that's the route we should go. I don't know.
How long, I know you got the little motion on the fifth, but is that going to affect the table?
No, it just, sorry. Just trying to make sure people online can hear what we're saying. Just as I said before, we won't start that process until we know what the plan development looks like, to make sure that it's in line with each other. So with the revisions that the city has made to the TIF ordinance, we can get through that process a lot quicker than we used to be able to, because we only have an internal TIF committee review before it comes to planning and zoning. So our timeframes are a little bit better now with the changes to the city ordinance.
Well, and you know, I understand that you need to move on this thing. We're in the end of January already. And I'm sure that the folks that are involved in wanting to see construction happen here would like to see us start digging come spring.
Neil, will you please bring up the revised plat map with the 80-foot lots?
Joe, find your email. I think I emailed it.
What do you think?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't think, I think I can speak for everyone in this room in that, you know, everybody here wants the best for the city. And I think the art of compromise needs to be used, and I think we can make it happen. It's just we need to make sure the compromise is where we need to be.
You guys that are proposing it to us, what are your thoughts on it? Because we can do a couple of things here. We can take a look at it and say, no, city council, we don't like it, and it'll go on to them and let them do what they need to do. We can say, okay, city council, we think this is a good deal, and let it go on to them and do what they need to do. Or we can table it and come back in a couple of weeks and do it again. Now, you folks here are we're gonna want some input from you. What do you think we should do here?
Jeff McCormick with SPN. Just a comment I'm going to make, because I've been bugging Mark for 2 months now, that if we want to go to construction, start spring, I need a plan that I can get started on and doing design. But in reading a bunch of the comments that were there and this discussion, I mean, my involvement is the infrastructure, but I just want a couple of things just to clarify, so make sure I understand as we try to redraw this plat. The idea is to get the buffer from the R1 zoning to the R4 zoning. R1 zoning is an 80-foot minimum lot with a 3-foot side setback. So, I mean, that's what we're trying to buffer. And I believe if I was just looking at the zoning map, right, the Roland Street is zoned R3, which buffers the R1 of Firesteel. So is it the potential that this could be zoned R3, similar to that of that neighborhood? And if I looked up correctly, the zoning for R3 is a minimum lot width of 60 feet and a side setback of 3.
I think that's why you did what you did to start.
Right.
Yeah.
So it really matches the neighborhood with what they've got and offering that. Now, that doesn't mean the lots have to be that narrow, but that's what's allowed within that current zoning.
I may not have all the history on this. When Roland Lane was put in, the apartment complex up on the end of it, on Foster, was already in existence, okay? So you couldn't zone it R1 at that point. It had to be zoned R3 to accommodate that. But the lots were set up at a certain minimum width, and most of those homes, I think, were Detached built, and there was a minimum square foot on each one of those homes.
Within their covenants.
Within their covenants.
Sure.
That's why they were built in that way, and they're bigger homes.
Okay. Yeah, and I certainly don't know the history of that in that location. I'm just looking at what the current zoning map shows.
Yes.
I can verify that. I talked to the developer. I live on Roland Lane. My name is Van Wire. And I talked to the gentleman that developed that.
Okay.
And just like Doug said, the 2 fourplexes were there on the corner. It could not be zoned. That was already R3. So when those lots when they were contacted by MTI to build VOTEC houses there, they said, we will allow that, but they will meet the R1 restriction that is on Firesteel Drive through contract of those lots. And that's how that was handled. And as I said in my comments to you board, and I appreciate you being here, I hope before you came today that you drove down Firesteel Drive and Roland Lane. As Pam alluded to earlier, the smallest lot is 13,500 feet, and there's several that are 22,000. We've got some space. We've got some room. We're a very established, quiet neighborhood. I think we're asking for a compromise. If some kind of protection, buffer zone, whatever you want to call it, can be put along the south side of 8th Street. And I guess in my own mind, I just have a real hard time understanding why the main access to this development, and we are not, all the neighbors I've talked to, nobody is anti-growth. Nobody. I'm not. Why can't this development be accessed off of Foster Street? It's a main thoroughfare. There's that old farm that sits there. Could 7th Street, I mean, isn't there some way, instead of running all the way down 8th Street and coming in the backside, or all the way down Bridal Acres? That little street, you put 2 cars on each curb, there's no room. for trucks and semis that are gonna be coming in and out of there. You know, Mr. Chair, I think your idea of tabling, you know, we were all aware of this January 10th when it came out in the paper. And it's happened awful fast for us. And we're trying to be accommodating, but we're trying to also be accommodated too. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Can you bring this that you've got on with, further south, down here? Okay, that's good enough. The street, Jeff, have you figured out putting the street clear out to Foster that's going there like showed on the concept drawing?
Yes,
Are you-
that is the plan, it's just not until Avera is done using their facility.
That's going to run through the parking lot, isn't it?
Correct. So as long as the hospital is still there and using that parking lot, that part of the phase of the development won't happen. And then obviously, to me, once the hospital's not there, there's gonna be a lot less traffic within that area. But yes, we have that coming out onto Foster.
Okay. So for the original phase one, you're going to be looking at some of these houses that like butt up against the backside of Bridle Drive.
Their entrance in and out is either through
Yeah,
Calhoun
they'll
or
have
to 8th.
Either from 8th Street down.
Yep,
Or off of Calhoun in.
yep.
Okay. Yeah, there's a street in there. Right. Right. All right, thanks, Jeff. What do you think, guys?
Well, I like the amendment, but we also like to.
Well, we gotta make a motion on the project first, I think.
I like the concept. I think there's some things that could be ironed out a little better before we say yes or no.
Is that motion to table? I would agree. Second.
Yeah, I guess it's a motion.
I can chime in here a little bit.
Yeah.
If there's going to be some amendments and stuff, it's likely that we'll have to re-meet the noticing publication deadlines. So if your if your motion is to table it, you can leave that to staff and we'll bring it back as soon as we can meet those publishing deadlines.
Is that 2 weeks? Is that 4 weeks? What are we thinking?
I don't know off the top of my head. It depends on when we can get it to the paper and that kind of stuff. So we can bring it back as early as we can.
The problem is would really put the project at disadvantage.
Yeah, it would. And have you already had first reading? No. That's all. So you can amend what's in that. If I'm wrong here.
If there's a substantial.
But now or not, we're probably going to end up looking at it again, aren't we? Yes, sir.
Mike Bathke, Clint had said that if we were to start it now, we still wouldn't be starting it till late fall. So I don't think it's a timing of when it comes back, because of construction season has already been moved because of last year's construction season.
Well, let me comment on that. I don't anticipate any housing construction until late fall.
But you're looking at infrastructure.
Infrastructure needs to go out sooner rather than later. I mean, one of the concerns that we've got and Jeff's got, when you look at the amount of heavy construction work that rolled over from 2019, I mean, most of my heavy construction contractors carried about 30% of a summer's worth of workload from 2019 to 2020. And so DOT basically left a full letting schedule even though everybody was 30% booked already. So if you're not bidding stuff here fairly soon, you're going to be at a substantial disadvantage on bidding environment. Maybe true.
We have a motion before us to table. We have a second to that motion. We have been having some discussion on that motion at this point. Is there further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, let's go a roll call vote, and the motion is to table.
Kinslinger.
Yes.
Schertz.
Yes.
Locke.
Abstain.
Bergen.
Yes.
Larson.
Yep.
Osterlus.
Yes.
Columbia.
Yes.
We'll be in touch. Guys, you folks that need, I understand, but we gotta know better, I think. All right. Next item on the agenda. If you need, is there any other business to come before this body at this time? If there is no other business to come before this body at this time, if you need to address the City Planning Commission on an item that was not on the agenda, excluding personnel items, please come forward to the podium, state your name and concern. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes. Items will be considered, but no action will be taken. I see no one coming. We are adjourned. Whoops, sorry. I don't think we have much choice here. The further we got into this thing, the more sure I was we're going to have to